The sun was setting over the horizon when I arrived in the small town of Millbrook, painting the sky with shades of orange and red that seemed like premonitions of the horror I was about to discover. The streets were strangely deserted for a Tuesday night, the silence broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalks. I had been an FBI special agent for over a decade, but nothing in my career could have prepared me for what I would find in that seemingly peaceful town. My mission was to investigate a series of mysterious disappearances that had occurred over the last few months. Headquarters suspected a serial killer, but something told me we were dealing with something much more sinister. As I walked towards the hotel where I would be staying, I couldn't help but notice the elongated shadows cast by the buildings. They seemed to move unnaturally, as if they had a life of their own. I shook my head, trying to dispel this absurd idea. Years of difficult cases had made me paranoid, I thought. The hotel was an old 3-story building with a worn facade that had seen better days. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with deep circles under her eyes, barely looked up when I entered. Her vacant, distant gaze gave me an involuntary shiver. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "I have a reservation in the name of John Miller." She typed something into the computer with mechanical, almost robotic movements. "Room 237, 3rd floor," she muttered, handing me an old key. Her fingers were as cold as ice when they touched my hand. Climbing the creaking stairs, I had the feeling I was being watched. The corridors were poorly lit, with lamps flashing erratically. I reached my room and locked the door behind me, relieved to have a moment of privacy. The room was small and austere, with a single bed, a desk, and a tiny bathroom. I put my suitcase on the bed and began to organize my belongings. That's when I noticed something strange. A low, constant hum that seemed to be coming from the walls. I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to identify the source of the sound. The buzzing increased in intensity, and for a moment I had the impression of hearing distorted voices mixed in with the noise. I turned away abruptly, my heart racing. I decided I needed some fresh air. I left the hotel and walked through the dark streets, trying to organize my thoughts. The few people I saw seemed rushed, avoiding eye contact. Their faces were pale, with a constant expression of fear. I reached a central square where a peculiar monument caught my eye. It was a bronze statue representing a humanoid figure with strange proportions and a face that looked more like a mask than a real face. The plaque on the base was corroded, making it impossible to read the inscription. While I was examining the statue, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, my hand instinctively going to the gun hidden under my coat. It was an elderly man bent over a cane. His eyes, however, shone with surprising lucidity. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice shaky but firm. "They'll realize you're not one of us." "Who is they?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. The old man looked around nervously before answering. "The visitors. They arrived months ago, but nobody noticed at first. Now it's too late." Before I could ask any more questions, he quickly walked away, disappearing into the shadows. I stood there, perplexed, trying to process what I had just heard. Visitors. Could we be dealing with something extraterrestrial? I went back to the hotel, my mind filled with more and more fantastic theories. In my room, I turned on my laptop and started reviewing the case files. The disappearances had started exactly 6 months ago, coinciding with reports of strange lights in the night sky. As I analyzed the data, I noticed a disturbing pattern. All the missing persons had reported similar experiences in the days before their disappearance. Insomnia, ringing in the ears, and the feeling of being watched. A shiver ran down my spine when I realized that I had experienced 2 of these symptoms since arriving in the city. The ringing in the walls, the feeling of being watched. Could it be that I was already under the influence of whatever was happening in Millbrook? I decided to take a shower to clear my head. As the hot water poured over my tense body, I tried to rationalize the situation. Surely there was a logical explanation for all this. Perhaps a toxic gas released by some local industry, causing mass hallucinations. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the foggy bathroom mirror, a hazy shape began to materialize. It wasn't my reflection, but something else. A humanoid silhouette, but with the wrong proportions, just like the statue in the square. I blinked several times, my heart beating frantically. When I looked again, the mirror showed only my own frightened reflection. I stepped out of the shower shivering, not just from the cold, but from the fear that was now settling in my core. I went back into the bedroom and closed all the curtains, obsessively checking that the door was locked. The buzzing in the walls seemed louder now, almost pulsating. I tried to convince myself that it was just my overactive imagination, fueled by tiredness and the stress of the investigation. I lay down on the bed, knowing that sleep would be hard to come by. As I stared at the ceiling, I mentally went over the events of the day. The silent city, the strange receptionist, the old man in the square, the shape in the mirror. Everything seemed connected in some sinister way that I still couldn't understand. One thing was certain. There was something deeply wrong in Millbrook. And I had the terrible feeling that I was only scratching the surface of a mystery that could shake the foundations of reality as we know it. As the night wore on, I heard strange sounds coming from the street. Footsteps, unintelligible whispers, and occasionally a muffled scream that made my blood run cold. I resisted the urge to look out of the window, fearing what I might see. As dawn approached, I finally managed to fall into a restless sleep. My dreams were populated by creatures from the shadows, with glowing eyes and tentacles reaching out towards me. I woke up startled, bathed in cold sweat, certain that the nightmare had only just begun. The first day at Millbrook was over, but I knew that the horrors that awaited me were far from over. As I prepared to face a new day of investigation, one question echoed in my mind. How far would I be willing to go to uncover the truth? And, more importantly, would I survive to tell it? Dawn brought little comfort to Millbrook. The pale light seeping through the gaps in the curtains seemed sickly, as if the sun itself was contaminated by the city's sinister atmosphere. I got out of bed, my aching muscles protesting against the bad night's sleep. While I was getting ready for the day, I noticed something strange in the bathroom mirror. My reflection seemed off, as if it were a fraction of a second behind my movements. I blinked several times, trying to dispel the feeling of unreality that enveloped me. I went down to the hotel lobby, determined to begin my official investigation. The receptionist from the night before wasn't there. In her place, I found a middle-aged man with a forced smile that didn't reach his dull eyes. "Good morning," I said, flashing my FBI badge. "I'm here to investigate the recent disappearances. Could you tell me if you've noticed anything unusual in recent months?" The man visibly tensed. "Nothing unusual, sir. Millbrook is a quiet town." His voice sounded mechanical, as if he were reciting a rehearsed script. I realized I wouldn't get any useful information there. I left the hotel and headed towards the local police station. The streets were busier than the night before, but there was something disturbing about the way people moved. Their steps were too rhythmic, their movements synchronized in a way that seemed unnatural. At the police station, I was met by the sheriff, a burly man called Frank Hadley. He seemed to be the only one in town who didn't emanate an aura of strangeness. "Officer Miller," he greeted me with a firm handshake. "We've been expecting your arrival. These disappearances are driving us crazy." I sat down in his office and began reviewing the case files. "Sheriff Hadley, have you noticed any patterns in these disappearances?" He scratched his gray beard. "Apart from the fact that people just disappear without a trace, not much. But He hesitated, glancing nervously at the closed door. "There's something I haven't put in the official reports." I leaned forward, puzzled. "What would that be?" "Lights," he whispered. "Strange lights in the sky, always the night before a disappearance, and a hum, as if the whole city was vibrating." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I remembered the buzzing I'd heard in the hotel walls. "Have you investigated the origin of these lights?" The sheriff shook his head. "Every time we try to get close, they disappear, and no one in town seems to remember them the next day. It's as if..." He hesitated again. "As if something is erasing their memories." I left the police station with more questions than answers. I decided to visit the sites of the disappearances, starting with the home of the first victim, Sarah Thompson. The Thompson residence was a typical suburban house with a well-kept garden and closed curtains. I rang the doorbell and was answered by an exhausted-looking woman who introduced herself as Sarah's mother. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Agent Miller from the FBI. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your daughter's disappearance." She invited me in, her movements slow and hesitant. The house was spotlessly clean, but there was a feeling of abandonment in the air. "Sarah was different in the weeks before she disappeared," Mrs. Thompson began, her voice trembling. She talked about strange dreams, about beings watching her through the window. "What kind of beings?" I asked, feeling my heart racing. She never described it in detail. She said she couldn't remember clearly, only that they were wrong somehow. The woman shuddered. "The night she disappeared, I heard a loud ringing coming from her room. When I went in, the window was open and Sarah was gone. I asked to see Sarah's room. It was a typical teenage girl's room, with posters on the walls and a desk full of books. But there was something out of place. On the ceiling, above the bed, I noticed a dark stain that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it. "That stain," I pointed, "has it always been there?" Mrs. Thompson looked where I was pointing, confused. "What stain?" "The ceiling is clean, Agent Miller." I blinked several times, but the stain was still there, pulsing subtly. It was as if only I could see it. A disturbing thought crossed my mind. What if whatever was behind the disappearances was already aware of my presence? I left the Thompson house with a growing sense of unease. As I walked down the street, I noticed that the shadows seemed to move independently of the objects that projected them. In a moment of panic, I thought I saw dark tentacles reaching out from the shadows towards me. I decided to visit the local library, hoping to find some information about the town's history that might shed light on recent events. The librarian, an elderly woman with thick glasses, looked at me suspiciously when I asked to see the historical archives. "We have few old records," she said, her voice rough. "There was a fire a few years ago that destroyed a large part of our collection." While leafing through the few books available, I found an interesting mention. Apparently, in 1952, there was a series of UFO sightings in the region, followed by an outbreak of a mysterious disease that affected a large part of the population. I was so engrossed in my reading that I didn't notice the time passing. When I finally looked at the clock, I saw that it was almost evening. The library was strangely silent, and, as I looked around, I realized that I was alone. I stood up, feeling a chill run down my spine. The lights began to flicker and the familiar hum filled the air. Between the bookshelves, I saw shapes moving, shadows that didn't belong to any visible object. I ran for the exit, my heart beating frantically. The shadows seemed to be chasing me, their contours solidifying into shapes that defied logic and sanity. Dark tentacles stretched out towards me, almost reaching me. I managed to get out of the library and ran through the dark streets of Millbrook. The night sky was illuminated by pulsating lights that didn't belong to any known star or plane. The few people on the streets didn't seem to notice anything strange, their eyes glazed over and expressions empty. I arrived panting at the hotel, locking myself in my room. My mind was spinning with the information I had gathered and the impossible things I had witnessed. It was clear that something beyond human comprehension was happening in Millbrook. I sat up in bed, shaking, and reached for my phone to make a call. I needed backup, someone who could help me understand what was going on. But when I tried to dial, I realized there was no signal. I looked out of the window and saw the strange lights hovering over the city. The buzzing increased in intensity, making the walls vibrate. And then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Behind me, a tall, inhuman figure was slowly materializing. Its outlines were hazy, but I could make out multiple limbs and a face that was a grotesque parody of human features. I turned quickly, ready to face the creature, but the room was empty. However, the buzzing persisted, louder than ever, and I knew that the night was far from over. As I prepared myself for whatever came next, a certainty formed in my mind. The disappearances, the lights, the shadows, everything was connected. And I was about to discover a truth that could forever change our understanding of the universe and our place in it. The deafening hum continued to reverberate around the room, making my bones vibrate. My eyes frantically scanned every corner, hoping to see the grotesque creature materialize again. But the room remained empty, an illusory calm in the midst of the supernatural storm that seemed to engulf Millbrook. I decided that staying in the room was no longer a safe option. With trembling hands, I gathered my essential belongings into a backpack, including my service weapon and the notebook where I had written down my findings. Before leaving, I took one more look in the mirror. My reflection seemed distorted, as if I were looking through wavy glass. For a moment, I swore I saw something moving behind my reflected image. I quietly left the hotel, avoiding the lobby. The streets were deserted, bathed in a pulsating bluish light from the sky. The air was heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I walked quickly, trying to decide my next move. It was then that I remembered the old man I had met in the square. He seemed to be the only one willing to talk openly about the visitors. I decided that I needed to meet him again. As I headed towards the central square, I noticed subtle changes in the city. The shadows seemed deeper, almost liquid, and occasionally I saw shapes moving in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. Arriving at the square, I found it empty, except for the strange statue I had noticed earlier. Under the bluish light, the bronze figure seemed almost alive, its contours moving subtly. I approached, fascinated and horrified at the same time. It was then that I heard a hoarse voice behind me. "You're still here. They haven't caught you yet." I turned quickly, my hand instinctively going for my gun. It was the old man, his eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on in this town?" The old man looked around nervously before answering. "They've been here a lot longer than we realize. They hide in the shadows, in the spaces between things. But now they're getting bolder." "The disappearances," I said, the pieces starting to fit together in my mind. "Are they responsible?" He nodded gravely. "They collect, they take people to study, to understand. But it's not like in the movies, Agent. There are no shiny spaceships or little green men. They're something else, something our brains can barely comprehend." A shiver ran down my spine as I remembered the figure I saw materializing in my room. "How do you know all this?" The old man's eyes filled with tears. "My granddaughter. She was one of the first, but before she disappeared, she told me about her dreams, about the voices she heard. And then one night, I saw them taking her away. There was nothing I could do, nothing but watch. I felt a wave of compassion and horror." "How long has this been going on?" "Decades," he replied. "Maybe centuries. They subtly influence, manipulate events. The fire in the library, it wasn't accidental. They don't want us to know our own history." I remembered the few records I'd found of UFO sightings in 1952. "What about the outbreak of disease at that time?" The old man laughed bitterly. "Disease? No. It was their first large-scale experiments, testing our resistance, our adaptability." My mind was spinning with the implications. If what the old man was saying was true, we were dealing with something far beyond a simple case of missing persons. It was a silent invasion, a prolonged study of humanity by beings that defied our understanding. "Is there any way to stop them?" I asked, feeling simultaneously determined and hopeless. The old man hesitated. "Perhaps. There are rumors of a place in the forest, a cave where reality is different. They say it's a portal, a point of contact between our world and theirs. If we could close it." Before he could finish, a deafening hum filled the air. The lights around the square flashed frantically, and the shadows began to move unnaturally, converging in our direction. "Run!" shouted the old man, pushing me. "They know we're talking. Go into the forest, to the north. Find the cave." I hesitated for a moment, not wanting to leave the old man, but he pushed me again with surprising strength for someone of his age. "Go! You're our only hope now!" With a heavy heart, I started to run. I looked back one last time and saw, in horror, the shadows engulfing the old man. His scream of agony was drowned out by the growing hum. I ran through the streets of Millbrook, my lungs burning and my muscles protesting. The shadows seemed to be chasing me, dark tentacles reaching out towards me. The few people I saw on the streets seemed not to notice the chaos around them, their eyes glazed and expressions empty. I finally reached the edge of the city. The forest stretched out in front of me, dark and threatening. The humming subsided, but I could feel an evil presence watching me, waiting to pounce. I entered the forest, the ancient trees forming a canopy that blocked out the strange light from the sky. I walked for hours, guided only by my instinct and the vague directions given by the old man. The forest seemed to change around me, the paths altering and the trees moving when I wasn't looking directly at them. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw an opening between the rocks. A cave, exactly as the old man had described. I approached cautiously, feeling the air around me become denser, as if reality itself were bending. At the entrance to the cave, I saw strange inscriptions carved into the stone, symbols that seemed to shift and twist when I tried to focus on them. And beyond, in the depths of the cave, a pulsating light that didn't belong in this world. I took a deep breath, knowing that I was about to cross a point of no return. Whatever lay beyond that entrance, I knew it would forever change my understanding of the universe and my place in it. With one last look back at the world I knew, I entered the cave. The familiar hum filled my ears, growing in intensity until it became almost unbearable. The pulsating light grew stronger, engulfing me completely, and then, in the blink of an eye, I was no longer in the cave. Or maybe I was, but not as we knew it. The space around me bent and contorted in impossible ways. Shapes that defied Euclidean logic floated in the air. And in the center of it all, I saw them, the visitors, the beings who had been manipulating the history of Millbrook, perhaps the history of humanity, for centuries. They were just as the old man had said, something our brains could barely comprehend. As I struggled to keep my sanity in the face of what I was seeing, a certainty formed in my mind. This was only the beginning. The real horror, the real revelation, was yet to come. There are no words in any human language that can adequately describe what I saw in that place beyond the cave. It was as if all the laws of physics we knew had been twisted, broken, and reassembled into an alien and insane configuration. The visitors moved around me, their shapes constantly changing. One moment, they seemed to have undulating tentacles and multifaceted eyes. The next, they were impossible geometric structures that pulsed with a sickly inner light. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing, and I felt I was on the verge of madness. A voice, if it can be called that, reverberated in my consciousness. They weren't words, but pure concepts. Ideas so vast and alien that they threatened to tear my psyche apart. Observer, intruder, specimen. I realized with horror that they were referring to me. I tried to speak, but my voice seemed to have been swallowed up by the non-Euclidean void around me. Curiosity, study, assimilation. Images began to flood my mind. I saw the history of Millbrook unfold before my eyes, but not as we knew it. I saw the visitors influencing crucial events, subtly manipulating the course of the town over the centuries. I saw the fire in the library, caused not by accident, but by agents of the visitors, eliminating records that could reveal their presence. I saw the 1952 outbreak, not a disease, but a series of large-scale experiments testing the limits of human physiology and psychology. And then, with growing horror, I saw the disappearances. People being torn from their homes, from their lives, brought into this impossible realm. I saw Sarah Thompson, the missing girl, floating in a crystalline chamber, her body connected to machines that defied comprehension. She was alive, but in a state between consciousness and something else. Understanding, evolution, symbiosis. I began to understand. although each new revelation threatened to shatter my sanity. The visitors weren't invaders in the traditional sense. They were researchers, scientists from a reality so far beyond our own that their actions seemed cruel and incomprehensible to us. Millbrook wasn't just a town, it was a laboratory, a large-scale experiment that had been going on for centuries. And now, the experiment was entering its final phase. One of the entities approached me. Its form changed constantly, but for a moment, it took on a vaguely humanoid appearance. It stretched out what could be called a hand, touching my forehead. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. It felt as if every neuron in my brain was on fire. Memories, knowledge, and sensations that weren't mine flooded my consciousness. I saw the vastness of the cosmos like never before. Entire galaxies reduced to mere grains of sand on an infinite beach. I saw civilizations born and die in the blink of a cosmic eye. And I saw the visitors, traveling among the stars, studying, learning, evolving. I realized then that what was happening in Millbrook was not unique. On countless worlds, in countless realities, similar experiments were being conducted. All part of a grand plan, an ultimate goal that my human mind could barely comprehend. Choice, participation, transformation. The implicit offer was clear. I could join them, become part of something bigger, transcend the limits of human existence. Or I could resist and probably be discarded like so many others before me. For a moment, I was tempted. The knowledge, the power, the understanding of the universe that they offered, it was more than any human had ever dreamed of. But then, in a flash of clarity, I remembered the old man in the square, of Sarah Thompson. Of all the lives destroyed, all the families torn apart by this experiment. Humanity might be small and insignificant on the grand scale of the cosmos, but we were real. Our lives, our experiences, our emotions, all of it mattered. With all the willpower I could muster, I shouted in my mind, "No!" The effect was immediate. The entity moved away, its form undulating in patterns that suggested surprise, confusion. For the first time, I sensed that there was something the visitors hadn't expected. The space around me began to contort even more violently. The shapes of the visitors moved frantically, their patterns of light and shadow pulsing at a nauseating frequency. Anomaly, resistance, threat. I realized that my refusal had triggered something, a variable that they hadn't foreseen in their great experiment, and that scared them. Taking advantage of their momentary confusion, I concentrated on the image of the cave, the forest, the world I knew. It was like swimming against a cosmic current, every fiber of my being screaming in protest. Slowly, painfully, I felt myself being pulled back. The impossible realm of the visitors began to dissolve around me, giving way to the rocky walls of the cave. I fell to my knees at the cave entrance, panting and shaking. My mind was in tatters, flooded with knowledge and experiences that no human being should possess. I looked back into the darkness of the cave, and for a moment I saw the undulating outlines of the visitors, their alien forms writhing in the dimness. I knew they wouldn't let me go so easily. Whatever I had unleashed with my refusal, they would come after me. On shaky legs, I got up and started running through the forest. The full moon illuminated my path, but the shadows seemed to move in unnatural ways, as if the visitors were trying to catch up with me right here. As I ran, a certainty formed in my mind. I couldn't just run away. What I had learned, what I had seen, was too big to ignore. Millbrook, and perhaps the whole world, was in danger. I had to find a way to stop the visitors, to expose their plans. But how to fight against beings that challenged our own understanding of reality? The answer, I realized with a mixture of fear and determination, could lie in the very knowledge they had inadvertently shared with me. Somewhere, buried in the avalanche of cosmic information that now resided in my mind, could be the key to saving humanity. As the forest opened up and I saw the lights of Millbrook in the distance, I knew that the real battle was just beginning, and I was perhaps the only human being on Earth equipped to fight it. With one last look at the starry sky, now charged with a much deeper and more terrifying meaning, I quickened my steps towards the city. Time was running out, and I had a world to save. The walk back to Millbrook was a surreal journey. Every step I took seemed to alter the reality around me. The trees in the forest seemed to twitch and murmur, their shadows dancing in impossible ways under the moonlight. I didn't know if it was a residual effect of my experience with the visitors, or if my perception of reality had been permanently altered. When I reached the city limits, I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and organize my thoughts. My mind was overloaded with cosmic information, fragments of alien knowledge that threatened to drive me mad if I concentrated on them for too long. Millbrook seemed strangely calm, almost serene. The streets were deserted, the houses dark and silent, but I knew it was just a facade. Behind this apparent tranquility, an invisible battle was being waged. I decided that my first step should be to find allies. I needed people who could help me process the information I had obtained and formulate a plan of action. I thought of Sheriff Hadley. He seemed to be the only town official who wasn't under the influence of the visitors. I walked quickly towards the police station, my senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every noise in the night sounded like a warning. When I reached the police station, I noticed that there was a single light on inside. I knocked on the door urgently. After a few tense moments, I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing the tired and worried face of Sheriff Hadley. "Agent Miller," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and relief. "I thought you had... Well, it doesn't matter. Come in quickly." As soon as I entered, Hadley locked the door behind me and closed the curtains. He led me into his office, nervously checking over his shoulder every few steps. "Sheriff," I began, hardly knowing where to start, "what I've discovered is much worse than we imagined." Over the next few minutes, I tried to explain what had happened in the cave, what I had seen and learned about the visitors. Hadley listened to me with an expression that oscillated between skepticism and horror. That's crazy, Miller," he finally said, wiping his hand across his face. "But after what I've seen over the last few weeks, I can't say it's impossible." "We need to act," I said, feeling the urgency growing inside me. "The visitors are planning something big. I think Millbrook is just the beginning." Hadley nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to organize the chaos of information in my mind. Suddenly, an idea began to form. "The visitors use advanced technology to manipulate reality," I explained. "But this technology must have a central point, a nexus from where they control everything." "And you think we can find that nexus?" Hadley asked, skepticism evident in her voice. "Not just find it," I replied, feeling a wave of determination run through me. "I think we can use it against them." I spent the next hour explaining my plan to Hadley, using the fragments of alien knowledge in my mind. I believed we could locate the visitors' control center. If we could access it, perhaps we could reverse their effects on Millbrook and expose their presence to the world. Hadley listened attentively, asking occasional questions and offering valuable insights. Despite his initial incredulity, he seemed to be accepting the gravity of the situation. "This is crazy, Miller," he finally said, "but I think it's our only chance." We set to work immediately. Hadley used his contacts in the city to gather a small group of people who didn't seem to be under the visitors' influence. Meanwhile, I concentrated on deciphering the alien information in my mind, trying to locate the nexus of control. The hours passed in a blur of frenetic activity. As the sun began to rise, we had a plan of action. The nexus, we discovered, was located under Millbrook's Old Town Hall, a building that had been abandoned for years due to structural problems. Our group gathered at the back of the police station. In addition to Hadley and me, there were 5 other people: a local doctor, a high school physics teacher, a telecommunications technician, and 2 young brothers who worked in the town's electronics store. "What we're about to do is dangerous," I warned the group. "The visitors probably already know we're moving against them, but it's our only chance to save Millbrook, and maybe the world." Armed with a mixture of makeshift equipment and desperate determination, we headed for the Old Town Hall. The streets were strangely empty, the air heavy with palpable tension. As we approached the building, I sensed a change in the atmosphere. The air seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, and the shadows around us seemed to move independently. "They know we're here," I muttered to Hadley. I had barely finished speaking when the sky above us suddenly darkened. Black clouds formed out of nowhere, swirling in an ominous vortex. Lightning bolts of impossible colors cut through the sky, and the familiar hum of the visitors filled the air. "Quick!" I shouted, running towards the entrance to the town hall. As we ran, I saw out of the corner of my eye shapes materializing in the shadows. Dark tentacles stretched out towards us, threatening to drag us into some realm beyond human comprehension. We reached the main door, which was locked. Without hesitation, Hadley used his shoulder to break in. We stumbled into the dusty lobby, the darkness engulfing us. Using flashlights, we made our way towards the basement. With each step, the feeling of wrongness increased. The walls seemed to pulsate with a life of their own, and occasionally we caught glimpses of impossible shapes moving in the shadows. Finally, we came to a metal door at the bottom of the basement. It was covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift and twist when we looked directly at them. "This is it," I said, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. "The Nexus is on the other side." Using a combination of the alien knowledge in my mind and the technical expertise of our makeshift team, we set to work on the door. The minutes passed like hours, the hum of the visitors getting louder and louder. Finally, with an ominous click, the door opened. A bluish, pulsating light emanated from inside, illuminating a room that defied every law of physics we knew. In the center of the room, floating in the air, was a crystalline structure that pulsed with energy. Lines of force extended from it in all directions, disappearing into the walls. "This is it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The visitors' control center." As we approached the structure, I felt a resistance in the air, as if reality itself was trying to stop us from moving forward. Shadowy shapes began to materialize around us, the impossible outlines of the visitors taking shape. "Now!" I shouted, signaling for our team to start the plan. The telecommunications technician and the brothers from the electronics store began to configure the equipment we had brought, trying to interfere with the Nexus's energy patterns. The physics teacher and the doctor were working furiously on calculations, trying to decipher the alien logic behind the technology. I approached the crystalline center, feeling the alien knowledge in my mind resonate with the energy of the structure. With trembling hands, I stretched out my arms towards the pulsating core. The moment I touched the crystalline surface, the world exploded in light and sound. I felt my consciousness expand, connecting not only with the Nexus, but with the entire network of altered reality that the visitors had created. I saw Millbrook, I saw the world, I saw entire galaxies connected by cosmic lines of force. And at the center of it all, I saw the visitors in their true form, beings of pure energy and information, so far beyond human comprehension that the mere sight of them threatened to shatter my sanity. With superhuman effort, I focused on Millbrook. Using the knowledge and connection I now possessed, I began to dismantle the visitors' influence over the town. It was like trying to redirect a river with my bare hands, but slowly, painfully, I began to make progress. All around me, I heard screams from my companions, from the visitors, from reality itself being rewritten. The air was full of light and shadow, impossible shapes materializing and disappearing in an instant. And then, with a deafening crash that seemed to shake the very foundations of the universe, something broke. The light dissipated, the hum ceased, and I fell to my knees, exhausted and disoriented. Slowly, the reality around us began to stabilize. I looked at my companions, who all looked as shocked and exhausted as I felt. Hadley approached, holding out his hand to help me up. "Did we make it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I closed my eyes for a moment, probing the remnants of alien knowledge in my mind. "I think so," I replied slowly. "At least for now." We staggered out of the town hall, emerging into a Millbrook that looked normal. The sky was clear, the sun was shining, and we could hear the distant sounds of people going about their daily lives, but I knew that our victory was only temporary. The visitors had been repelled, but not defeated, and now that they knew we could resist, they would come back, stronger, more determined. As I watched the city slowly awaken to a new day, free from alien influence for the first time in centuries, I made a silent promise. I would use the knowledge I had acquired, no matter how dangerous, to protect humanity. The battle for Millbrook was over, but the war against the visitors was just beginning, and I would be on the front line, ready to face whatever the cosmos threw at us. The days following our confrontation with the visitors were a whirlwind of activity and uncertainty. Millbrook slowly awoke from its collective trance, its inhabitants confused and disoriented, as if emerging from a prolonged and disturbing dream. I spent endless hours debriefing agents from the FBI and other government agencies who arrived in town as soon as communications were re-established. I tried to explain what had happened, what we had faced, but words seemed inadequate to describe the vastness and horror of what we had experienced. A week after the incident, I was sitting in Sheriff Hadley's office, looking out of the window onto the town's central square. The strange statue that had once seemed to wriggle and shift had been removed, leaving only an empty pedestal, a silent reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. "How are you coping with all this, Miller?" Hadley asked, offering me a cup of coffee. I accepted the drink with a tired smile. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced that I'm back in that cave or that impossible room under City Hall." Hadley nodded understandingly. "I know how you feel. Nothing seems real anymore, does it?" "Exactly," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "And the worst thing is that I know it's not over. The visitors will come back, maybe not here, maybe not now, but they will come." A heavy silence fell over us. The weight of the knowledge we carried, the burden of protecting the world from a threat we could barely comprehend, seemed almost unbearable. At that moment, a young woman hurried into the office. I recognized her immediately. It was Sarah Thompson, the first person to disappear, whom we had rescued from the visitors' influence. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I needed to thank you personally for bringing me back, for saving us all." I looked at her, noticing the deep circles under her eyes, the subtle tremor in her hands. She, like all of us who had been in direct contact with the visitors, would carry the scars of this experience forever. "Sarah," I said softly, "do you remember anything about the time you spent there?" She closed her eyes for a moment, her face contorting into an expression of pain and confusion. "Fragments," she whispered. "Images, sensations, things that don't make sense. Sometimes I have dreams, nightmares, that I'm floating in infinite space, watched by something." I nodded understandingly. "I know what it's like, but you're safe now. We all are, at least for now." Sarah opened her eyes, staring at me with surprising intensity. "But it's not over, is it? They're still out there." "Yes," I answered honestly. "They are." A heavy silence fell over the office. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed strangely loud, as if it were counting down the moments until the next inevitable encounter with the stranger. Hadley snorted, breaking the silence. "So, what do we do now?" I took a deep breath, organizing my thoughts. The alien knowledge in my mind, although fragmented and confused, was still there, a constant presence in the corners of my consciousness. "We need to prepare," I finally said. "Use what we've learned, what we've experienced, to strengthen our defenses. Not just here in Millbrook, but all over the world." Sarah nodded vigorously. "I want to help. I know it's dangerous. I know it could cost me my sanity. But after what I've been through, after what we've all been through, I can't just go back to my normal life." I looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure? It won't be easy." "I am," she replied, her voice firm. "Besides, I think we've all been changed by this experience. We'll never be who we were before." Hadley stood up, walking over to the window. "I'm going to need to recruit more people," he said, more to himself than to us. "Train a special force. Someone needs to be prepared for what's coming." As the three of us discussed plans and possibilities, I felt a strange mixture of fear and hope growing inside me. The world had changed irreversibly. The veil separating our everyday reality from the cosmic truths beyond our comprehension had been torn, and there was no way to sew it back together. But at the same time, there was an opportunity here. A chance to expand our understanding of the universe, to prepare ourselves for the challenges to come. Perhaps in time, we could even establish some kind of meaningful communication with the visitors, understand their motivations, find common ground. In the weeks and months that followed, Millbrook became the center of a new secret global initiative. Scientists, military personnel, and experts in fields we could barely name converged on our small town. Laboratories were built, technologies developed, theories formulated and tested. I found myself at the center of it all, using the alien knowledge in my mind to guide our research and preparations. It was exhausting and often frightening work. There were days when I questioned my own sanity, moments when the vastness of what we had discovered threatened to overwhelm me. But then I would look at the people around me, Hadley, Sarah, the scientists and technicians who had joined our cause, and find strength in their determination. Together, we were building something unprecedented, a line of defense against the unknown, a beacon of hope in a vast and indifferent universe. A year after our confrontation with the visitors, I was once again in Millbrook's central square. The once empty pedestal now held a new statue, not the alien and disturbing figure from before, but a stylized representation of humanity reaching for the stars. As I gazed at the monument, I felt a familiar presence beside me. It was the old man who had warned me about the visitors on that fateful night so long ago. "You did well, son," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "You saved a lot of lives." "But it's not over," I replied, feeling the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. The old man smiled a sad, wise smile. "It never ends. The universe is vast and full of wonders and horrors. But now we're awake. We're ready." I nodded slowly, letting his words comfort me. He was right, of course. What we had faced in Millbrook was only the beginning. The visitors would return, or perhaps we would encounter other entities even beyond our comprehension, but we would no longer be blind or helpless. We had looked into the abyss and survived. We had touched the unknown and come back to tell the tale. As the sun set over Millbrook, painting the sky with colors that now carried a new meaning for me, I felt a resolution solidify in my heart. Whatever future the cosmos had in store for us, we would be ready to face it. No longer mere victims or experimental subjects, but active participants in the great cosmic drama. And although the road ahead was uncertain and often frightening, there was one thing I was sure of. Humanity had awakened, and the universe would never be the same again.